I'm Christopher Clark, and I'm traveling the world to discover its true treasures, the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. This time, I'm in the Middle East, with its relics of long-lost global empires, its palaces, mosques, and legendary squares. My journey will take me to Isfahan, to Persepolis, Tehran, and Yazd in Iran. But first I'm headed to Jordan, into the desert of Wadi Rum, and to the old Nabatean city of Petra, carved into the cliffs. Wadi Rum is breathtakingly beautiful, and it's much more than just a desert. A spectacle of stone, sand, light in a time that seems to stand still. This is the landscape of Wadi Rum. For 12,000 years, the Bedouins and their culture have occupied this place. And what remains today of that long history? That's what I'd like to find out. These desert cliffs are up to 400 meters high. The Arabs call them Hisma. When the sandstorms come, it feels like you're on another planet. This valley was created by a geological fault more than 30 million years ago. Even the stars bow down to this land with us, as the Bedouins say. They revere this region. It has been their home since time immemorial, and it's a World Heritage Site. They live in tents that they weave themselves from goat's wool and camel hair. I am a guest of the Bedouin Sheikh, the chieftain of the tribe. The sound of the coffee mortar is an invitation. Coffee is more than a drink to the Bedouins. It came to them on the caravans from Yemen, where the Sufis used it to keep themselves alert during their nighttime devotions. There's an entire ceremonial culture associated with coffee.
Assalamu alaikum. And my name is Chris.
This is Sheikh Abu Nasr, the chieftain of the tribe, and his brother, who was also his deputy. Abu Nasr, how long has this tradition existed, coffee?
Yes. We've been brewing coffee for thousands of years. It's an important legacy from our ancestors. You will find coffee in every household. Drinking it is a valuable ritual for us.
Coffee's more than just a symbol of hospitality. Business deals, negotiations, problem solving, nothing happens without coffee, even within the family. You drink 3 cups, say the Bedouins. The first for your soul, the second for your sword, and the third because you are a guest. This is where the nomadic tribes who passed through this region 3,500 years ago depicted their world. Themselves, of course, as hunters, but also the domesticated animals, without which life in this part of the world would have been impossible. And we see here not just images, but also letters. Letters from the 3rd century before Christ, a reminder that literary culture, the culture of writing, has a long tradition in this place. I am meeting with the Bedouin Ali Muhammad, who is explaining the importance of this cultural site to me and upholding the legacy of his ancestors. Ali, thank you for coming.
My pleasure, thank you. People use this route for camel caravans between Hejaz in Arabia and the Mediterranean Sea. The caravans travel through our region, Wadi Rum. This spot here was a campground. The images and writings point to the coast. Goods were traded here. Leather from Arabia might be exchanged for silk or textiles from India or China, for example.
Ali, are you personally proud to be able to call these people your ancestors?
Yes, I'm very proud. We are Bedouins. We own camels. We used to transport all the goods in our caravans. Now we have settled in Wadi Rum and are very proud of our ancestry.
When British agent Thomas Edward Lawrence, known as Lawrence of Arabia, was traveling in Wadi Rum, he said that he felt humbled into insignificance by this landscape. And that makes sense to me, and I find it difficult to leave this magical place. But my destination is something of a consolation. I'm on my way to Petra, the millennia-old city carved into the cliffs at what was once the heart of an ancient Middle Eastern network of trade routes. The Nabatean people lived here. Petra was their capital, with palaces, temples, and tombs once lining a processional route. Relics of a great past, a civilization that, despite extensive research, is still shrouded in mystery. The city can only be entered from one side. At its narrowest point, the path is only 2 meters wide. This narrow access route made Petra impregnable, and some descendants of this legendary people still live here.
The Nabateans, people who carved this area here, they start carving the area and the temples in the area here. It's our grandfather. They carved that, and they were Nabateans, but were originally Nabateans. They comes from Yemen to Petra, and to have this area as a capital for them, and that is in 5th or 6th century BC. They do this. It was very famous at the olden time, because at the olden time in 5th century BC there were about 20,000 people of Nabateans. They were living here, and they have their palaces, and they have their kings, especially like Aretas the first, and the second, and the third, and the fourth. And they were the kings of the Nabateans.
The Nabateans came to the Transjordan region in the 1st century BC. Their caravan raids were widely feared. Later, they hit upon a more lucrative business idea and began serving as escorts to caravans en route to the Mediterranean. They also started trading. Isn't there something a little surreal or even absurd about the fact that there's an enormous city carved into the rock in the middle of a desert? Petra grew into a metropolis because it was located directly along one of the world's oldest trade routes, the Incense Road. Incense, myrrh, and spices like saffron, pepper, and cinnamon. Back then, all of these items were as valuable as gold, and they stimulated a flourishing international trade. The Nabateans, who were a bit like the oil sheikhs of the 20th century, transported this precious cargo from the Arabian Peninsula through the desert to the Mediterranean Sea via countless camel caravans. It was a sort of living pipeline. For a long time, it was believed that the Nabateans had left behind a golden treasure trove in Al-Khazne, the treasury hidden deep in the cliffs. The rumor is what lent this place its name. But the treasure was never found, and now we know that in fact this was a mausoleum for a Nabatean royal family. The elaborate facade tells a story of the power of this people who conquered more and more territory. At the pinnacle of their power, the Nabateans even conquered Damascus and laid siege to Jerusalem. But they'd clearly pushed their luck. The Roman Empire was having none of it and summarily annexed their territory. The Nabateans became Roman vassals. The kingdom became the Roman province of Petra. But why did this formerly flourishing mercantile city ultimately fade? In the 3rd century, mercantile cities like Palmyra in Syria rose up as competitors. And on top of that, Petra was hit by multiple earthquakes. No one knows exactly why the city was abandoned, but we are learning more and more about the architecture of this place, which is being explored on behalf of UNESCO by archaeologists like Giorgia Cesaro.
The style was very much influenced by the Hellenistic style coming from Greece. In fact, the Nabateans were merchants, so they were trading with the Greeks at the time, and they imported also some of their architectural styles. So of course there were also local features. For instance, the Nabatean capital is peculiar, is typical Nabatean, and it can be seen at the main monuments like the monastery or at there or in the treasury.
Today, Petra is mainly under threat from the large volumes of water that collect in the recesses of the cliff face during heavy rain. The water continuously hollows out the structures and can lead to avalanches. The Nabateans knew how to handle these risks.
Water needs to be managed appropriately, and Nabateans knew how to do that. And they were incredible engineers, hydraulic engineers. So they were able to divert waters in order to prevent floods in the site, but also to manage water for living uses and to store water. Again, for the house and to live. And all these features are visible today. And if we could reactivate all of these, we could probably reduce the risk of floods at the site.
A large-scale UNESCO program involving a team of geologists has been set up to protect the Petra sites from earthquakes and from enormous chunks of falling rock. Experts are training locals from the surrounding wadis. They can help the missions to protect this World Heritage Site, for which they feel an almost proprietorial responsibility. The knowledge of the Nabateans, who were expert engineers, is now being put back into practice here.
We have, see here, channels.
Yeah.
We need repair or restoration of the channels for the water, because some water go from up there to the wall to make some damage in to save this wall, to save this structure. Okay, to make a contour plan and management to the water.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And you look through here, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
I can see right into that.
And this is also how they search for loose pieces of rock that are on the verge of falling and causing damage during the next storm. Thanks to these special techniques, loose rocks can be encased and secured. It will take many years to complete this work, but in the end, it will help to preserve this World Heritage Site for generations to come.
How many anchors you put it in?
This is a human creation, but it looks as though it grew naturally from stone. Architecture in elegant synergy with the physical environment. Jordan is a land of many wonders. I'm headed into the desert east of Amman, which is home to this gem, Qusair Amra, built in the 8th century AD. Caliph al-Walid ibn Yazid of the powerful Umayyad dynasty commissioned the construction of this little pleasure palace. But why here, of all places, in the middle of a desert, where at most you could expect to have a few Bedouin families as neighbors? In the Middle Ages, the German Kaisers traveled from Palatinate to Palatinate, and the caliphs of the Arab world did much the same. They would relocate their entire court along with them every time they had to travel in order to demonstrate their power to the various Bedouin tribes within their often enormously extensive territories. This lovely spot, a little desert palace, is only about the size of an average 3-room apartment, about 80 square meters. But a whole universe was contained within this space, the world of the Umayyads, the first powerful rulers in the history of Islam.
Assalamu alaikum.
The frescoes in this treasure chamber are unique. They were painted into the fresh plaster. The images depict the joyful, hedonistic quality of life at an early Islamic court. You may be asking yourself, doesn't Islam strictly forbid the visual depiction of living beings? Well, it's true that today many Muslims believe that since God is the sole creator, no artist has the right to imitate that original act of creation. Whether this injunction can really be unambiguously derived from the Quran is debatable. By the time the prohibition of images started to come into effect in the late 8th century, the sumptuous festivities at the court of Caliph Al-Walid II were a thing of the past. As for what went on in this bathhouse back then, I'll leave that up to your imagination. These frescoes offer extraordinary insights into early Islamic art. One inscription reads, "May Allah make Al-Walid ibn Yazid virtuous." Perhaps there was a reason for that. In any case, it's clear that Al-Walid had his pleasure palace built when he was still a prince, and he definitely made use of it. Archaeologist Romel Gharib knows this place better than anyone.
This place is a special place. It's not for public. It's only for the Caliph who was, who's ruling this area, the capital in Damascus. They are coming down here to the desert to get sometimes fun, to get hunting, get relations with Bedouins or tribes who is living all over here. So this is a very private site. There is some images which you can read from this, that this is a Christian site, especially when you look at the images of Jesus or something, or the ancient images. But also, this is very simple to say that people who was living here, artists, they are doing the same images in the churches, which in Jerusalem, in Damascus, in Amman, all over this. So they are the same artists who are doing this kind of fresco.
For years, the frescoes underwent restoration using special techniques. But already in the 19th century, an incredible discovery had been made. Among the figures depicted here are the Emperor of China, Roderick of Spain, the King of the Goths, and the King of Ethiopia. The Caliph apparently considered these rulers as his peers. But pride comes before a fall. Al-Walid's reign lasted for just 1 year, after which he was overthrown and assassinated, and that marked the beginning of the end for the Umayyad dynasty. This desert palace was abandoned forever. It remained as a witness to an ancient heritage, preserved here as though it were locked away in a vault. I'm on my way to visit what remains of the hub of one of the great civilizations of the ancient Middle East. Long before there were great empires in Europe, Persian King Darius founded the ceremonial capital city of his empire in 520 BC, Persepolis. He found the perfect location in Persia's mountainous south. The old Persians called it Parsa. Persepolis was its Greek name. Little remains of its palaces and temples on this rocky 15-hectare plateau, but you sense that this was once the headquarters of an imperial power. Even the ruins are awe-inspiring. And this is how Persepolis looked in Darius's day. In the center was the Apadana, the king's audience hall. His residence was next to that, as were smaller palaces for the members of the royal court. The decisions made in this place had a lasting impact on the history of the world. The Persian Empire continued to expand, subjugating growing numbers of people. Conquered peoples sent envoys to Persepolis once a year, and they were always warmly received. King Darius and his successors were not arrogant in victory. The delegations sent by the 28 conquered nations entered the city of Persepolis through this gate of all nations. The Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen up until that point. Around 500 years before Christ, the empire comprised 44% of the global population at the time, and it extended from Egypt in the west through Turkey and all the way to Afghanistan and Pakistan in the east. The Gate of All Nations was an advertisement of the empire's pretensions. It opened like a large, friendly maw to accept the envoys of other nations that were now a part of the greater Persian Empire. Once they passed the gate, they were permitted to climb the stairs to the audience hall, just like the Persian nobles. On the day of the Persian New Year, Nowruz, delegations from all 28 countries climbed these steps up to the palace to pay tribute to the king. We can still picture it now as though we were watching a film. The Arabs with a camel, the Carians or Sarangians with weapons and a cow, the Libyans with a goat and cart, the Ethiopians with a jug and ivory. All of them came here to honor the King of Kings. At the eastern stairs of the Apadana Palace, you can still make out the courtiers and the incredibly detailed reliefs. They're over 2,500 years old. Some archaeologists believe that the emperor invited Greek artists to create these depictions. The differences between the delegations and their cultures are clearly visible. These images show only harmony and peace. There are no representations of strife or war. To be immortalized in a relief in this most sacred of places was considered an honor naturally, but it was also a clear declaration, set in stone literally, that these peoples owed the Persian king their undying obedience and service. All delegations had to report to the ruler. This was how he held together an empire made up by such diverse parts of the ancient world. And the monumental Apadana was the place where they all came together, the center of the king's empire. This was the seat of imperial rule, and in the conquered territories, governors known as satraps were installed. Just like the Romans, 1,000 years later, you might be thinking. But there is one important difference here. The Roman emperors wanted their subjects to identify with Rome, to become Roman. The Persians too were absolute rulers. They referred to themselves as Shahanshah, or King of Kings. But unlike the Romans, they permitted diverse religions and cultures in their empire. In fact, they were proud of that diversity. Naturally, they ruled with an iron fist, but that iron fist was wearing kid gloves, so to speak. In October 1971, the Shah at the time, Reza Pahlavi, celebrated the 2,500th anniversary of the Persian monarchy in Persepolis. He invited monarchs and presidents from around the world to the grandiose festivities, as though he were pretending to be Darius I.
Everybody had an active role in Achaemenid culture. No nation was dead during the Achaemenid period. It appears that everyone was in constant interaction and cultural exchange. If we were to pinpoint the major foundations that helped the formation of this civilization, it appears that the relative freedom established at that time facilitated all those interactions and cooperations. Therefore, each culture was given the chance to show what it had to offer.
In that sense, the great audience hall and its columns are still an important part of many Iranians' identity, despite, or perhaps because of the fact, that they represent a time before Islam had come to this country. This is another reason why, after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, the Ayatollahs wanted to tear out the last roots of the monarchy and finally raze Persepolis to the ground, but they were prevented from doing so. UNESCO named Persepolis a World Heritage Site in the same year, and the Iranians' pride helped to preserve this place. Of course, the Persians weren't merely kind-hearted philanthropists. If they had been, they wouldn't have waged bloody wars or conquered so many nations. But when Cyrus the Great took Babylon, he did something that no conqueror before him had ever attempted. He refused to create a regime of fear or to enslave his new subjects. He tolerated all of their customs, traditions, and languages, and he freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity and ensured that they could return to Jerusalem and rebuild their ruined temples. With this act, Cyrus the Great earned himself a place in the Old Testament of the Bible. And it was in Babylon, too, that a more than 2,000-year-old object was discovered, which, at first glance, looks like a terracotta rugby ball. But the engravings on this object, known as the Cyrus cylinder, are actually something like the first charter of human rights. The cylinder has been compared to the English Magna Carta or the American Constitution. The cylinder reads, "I declare today that every person is free to practice any religion they desire and to live where they please on the condition that they do not infringe on the property of others." Some tombs of the kings of Persia are carved deeply into the rock, but sadly it seems as if they've taken with them the idea of tolerance and respect for other cultures and beliefs. There are, of course, many downsides to empires. They're forged in war and they rule by force. But in order to survive, an empire also has to secure the allegiance of many peoples representing more than one ethnicity, language, and religion. Persepolis continues to act as a reminder of one of the most powerful world empires, and it's a source of pride for Iranians who remember that their country once hosted this most civil of ancient civilizations, a civilization whose descendants extended into the modern era. Here in Persepolis you find inscriptions all over the ancient ruins, and they stem from different historical periods. This one is 1700 years old. It comes from the Sassanid era, and it marks the visit by one of the satraps of the Shah, a certain Shahpur, the visit that he made to Persepolis about 1700 years ago. And of course he's wanted, with this inscription, he's sought to connect his name with the prestige and the value of this place. And here, on the other hand, we have an inscription from the 19th century, from the year 1876 to be precise, when the ruler of that time, Nasr-ed-Din Shah, came to Persepolis. And this inscription marks his visit. But what's interesting about this particular inscription is that in 1979, at the time of the Islamic Revolution, the name of that ruler, Nasr-ed-Din Shah, was removed. It's been chiseled away by a supporter of the revolution. And over here, the same has happened with the formula Shahenshah, King of Kings, because after that revolution, this figure in particular, Nasr-ed-Din Shah, had become an unperson. He was no longer wanted. The memory of him was to be erased. He was irrelevant. And then, in the middle of the First World War, Sergeant Lucas of the 21st Lancers inscribes his way into world history with this very simple piece of graffiti. It's the presence in one place of all these layers of time that's so fascinating. It almost makes you dizzy. The glories of Persepolis were already a thing of the past when Alexander the Great defeated the armies of Darius III in 331 BC. Alexander marched into Persia and committed a supreme act of vandalism when he entered Persepolis and put the city's magnificent buildings to the torch. It's widely believed that he did so as revenge for the partial destruction of the Acropolis in Athens by the Persians. In the 18th century, Tehran in the north of the country became the capital and the Shah's place of residence. The official seat of the monarchy was Golestan Palace with its extensive gardens. At first glance, it seems as though this place is a celebration of the ancient Middle East. But a new era was beginning. Soon the country would no longer be called Persia, but Iran, the land of the Aryans, a master race. It was a message to the rest of the world, to which Iran was increasingly turning its attention. For 2,500 years, the mixing of diverse cultures was a key feature of the Persian Empire in its various iterations. And then in 1848, when Shah Nasr ad-Din ascended the throne, a new element was added: Western culture. The Shah was an enthusiastic traveler to Western Europe, and he was determined to implant its culture in his Persian homeland. Persian influences were pushed into the background, and the Golestan Palace in Tehran is a fascinating symbol of a process of cultural change that would come to a tragic end in the 20th century. The tens of thousands of mirrors endow this UNESCO World Heritage Site with an Oriental mystique. But the architectural style was conceived in imitation of English and French palaces. This palace is a synthesis of everything the builders had seen on their many trips through Europe. Alienated from their own traditions, they wanted to play cultural catch-up. English paintings and French porcelain were essential. We're in the throne room where in 1967 Shah Reza Pahlavi crowned himself emperor and his wife Farah the first empress in Persian history. In so doing, she later said, he made all women in Iran empresses. The monarch, a determined and authoritarian ruler, initiated reforms that did not sit well with the deeply religious members of his society. Islam was also undergoing a process of revival and intensification in the country, and many Iranians felt that the Shah's interest in the West represented a threat to their values. This process had already begun under the Shah's father, who was also named Reza and resided in these rooms. I can't help wondering what pious Muslims made of images like this. For example, the clergymen, who were also routinely invited to court occasions. And then came the revolution in 1979. Many groups supported the revolution, but it was the religious who came to dominate the new regime. The Shah and his family fled the country, and Ayatollah Khomeini transformed Iran into a strict theocracy. Persia had once absorbed Islam, Persianizing it. Now Islam absorbed Iran. The Imam's name and image are still omnipresent in the Islamic Republic. The square in front of the Jame Mosque in Isfahan was renamed after Khomeini. The city's ancient tradition was folded into the new normality of clerical rule. But history can never be completely erased. When French traveler Jean Chardin arrived in Persia in 1666, he wrote that he found himself in the happiest and most flourishing empire in the world. A magical place full of luxury and yet so much more than a mere Eastern fantasy. Isfahan was located on the Silk Road, and the Persians traded with India, China, Central Asia and Byzantium. This was essentially the world's first common market. The carefully constructed network of roads was the perfect complement to the ports of the Persian Gulf. And alongside Constantinople and Cairo, Isfahan became one of the world's most advanced metropolitan cities in the 17th century, with bridges and bazaars, with gardens and palaces. The heart of Isfahan is a square, and not just any square. It's said to be the largest in the world, the length of 5 football fields. This UNESCO World Heritage Site tells the story of the city's golden age. It began when Shah Abbas I named Isfahan his capital in 1598. He summoned architects and artists from every corner of the empire, an empire that was already more than 2,000 years old. There was plenty of material to work with. He wasn't exactly starting from scratch. From this spacious, airy terrace, Shah Abbas could survey his entire city of paradise. He called this expansive square in the city center the image of the world. Just opposite was his private house of prayer, to the right was the enormous royal mosque, and to the left the gate of the bazaar that he loved to visit on his own without bodyguards. Isfahan was a safe place back then. The city didn't even have a prison. Abbas I succeeded in establishing Isfahan as a global center for art, handicrafts, science, and trade. And this is the Shah, surrounded by his royal court. No one before or after him has been so passionately revered in this country. Iranians still come to admire the enormous paintings in his garden palace. And the people of Isfahan are still proud of what was created under his rule. The rich artisanal traditions are alive and well here at the bazaar. Shah Abbas loved to chat with people. He would look over the artisans' shoulders as they worked, carpet makers, textile printers, glass blowers, and especially metal workers. In the late 2nd and early 1st millennium BC, the art of metalworking was already flourishing in Persia. This technique is known as ghalamzani, the art of engraving elaborate reliefs in silver, copper, or brass plates.
Salam. Haletun chetore?
Almost all of these objects have very elaborate patterns on them. Are these patterns, do they have a meaning, or are they just decoration?
Oh, no. These are ancient Persepolis patterns. This here, for example, is an old Persian king.
Darius.
Yes. And these are his soldiers. And the deity Ahura Mazda.
Ahura Mazda. Isfahan is a center of metalwork and of engraving, but also of many other handicrafts. Why is this city such an important center for handicrafts? How did it become that way?
Because since ancient times, Isfahan has been the home of great Iranian kings. The main road connecting different parts of the world passed through Isfahan, and it was a center of trade. Merchants from all over the world came to Isfahan. All sorts of handicrafts and other things could be found in Isfahan.
This is how Isfahan became a cosmopolitan city. Shah Abbas also commissioned the construction of this bridge. People from other cultures crossed it to enter the city. Muslims, Jews, Zoroastrians, Christians, and people of other faiths managed to live peacefully side by side in this place. Even today, Isfahan still radiates tolerance and a zest for life. In Abbas's day, the bazaar represented trade, the palace sovereignty, and the mosque religion. Today, the 11th century Jame Mosque is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is the mother of all mosques in Iran and the largest one in the country. Every leader over the centuries expanded it further, added more to it to honor Allah. The result is breathtaking. The Shah, who incidentally was born in the same year as astronomer Johannes Kepler and painter Caravaggio, invited craftsmen and artists from around the world to Isfahan. They brought cobalt and indigo pigments from India and China, using a secret kilning process to create the perfect blue that we see in the tin-glazed pottery and mosaics. Quran verses are harmoniously interwoven with patterns from nature. The Quran views nature as a book in which God reveals himself to humanity. This is another reason why gardens play such a vital role in Persian culture. The most important design elements include effects of light and shadow that highlight plants, pavilions, and masonry. Gardens was so important to Persian culture that the old Persian term paridaida, which was a synonym for garden, became the word for paradise in many other languages. The Persians essentially invented the enclosed, structured garden, and its elements influenced countless other cultures. It all goes back to Cyrus the Great, who had a garden planted around all of his palaces in the 6th century BC. They were ornate, private oases, but also symbols of his power and greatness. Persian gardens are part of UNESCO's World Heritage. Even Marco Polo described them as a paradise where the best fruits in the world grew and where the canals that ran through them flowed with milk, honey, wine, and water. Well, I couldn't find the canals Marco Polo mentions. Like many Europeans of the time, the Venetian trader bigged up his reports of the Orient with fantastical inventions. Today, our image of the Middle East is shaped more by media reports of extremism, political tyranny, and mass migration. And particularly in this age of deepening alienation, UNESCO World Heritage is all the more important. It reminds us not of what divides us, but of what unites us. In his West-Eastern Divan, inspired by the Persian poet Hafiz, the German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe finds words that still feel fresh after 200 years. If you truly know yourself and you know another's heart, then you'll know that East and West cannot be pulled apart. I'm on my way to the remote city of Yazd in the barren heart of the country. Approximately 1/6 of Iran is desert, and the Iranian deserts are legendary, the hottest and most arid areas of the country. There's very little humidity, rain is rare, the weather is extremely hot in summer and cold and dry in winter. But there's a lot of beauty in these desert regions. Some areas are dominated by dunes. The deserts of Central Asia and the subcontinent are mostly sand-covered. But the largest impassable area lies on the Iranian plateau in southeastern Persia. Yazd's location in the middle of a desert protected it from wars for thousands of years. When Genghis Khan's hordes descended on Persia, artists and philosophers sought refuge here. The traditional structure and design of this earthen city earned it a place in the list of World Heritage Sites. The city of Yazd is located in the Vavre Desert, close to the ancient spice and silk roads. The people here found ingenious ways of making do with the scarce resources available in a desert region. Water flows into the city through a sophisticated system of pipes and channels. Modernization has so far spared this remarkable city. This city will truly make you feel as if you've traveled back in time. Founded next to an oasis nearly 3,000 years ago, Yazd is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Its architecture is perfectly adapted to the hot climate here in the middle of the desert. Even today, many buildings are constructed using clay bricks, and the city's residents still benefit from the ancient wind towers constructed on top of residential homes and above cisterns. In fact, they are part of a centuries-old air conditioning system. It's a very clever design, and I want to take a closer look. The landmark wind towers jut out above the city, shaping the skyline. It's really hot outside, 36 degrees in the shade, but here it's pleasantly cool. Why? Because of water and wind. This structure is basically a gigantic architectural heat exchanger. Cool air comes down through the tower. It's further cooled by contact with the surface of the water, and the warm air inside the house, pulled up by a thermal current, leaves the house through this half of the tower. It works like this. The water required for this system comes from the high mountains nearby. Deep below the Jume Mosque of Yazd is the entrance to a system of channels that was constructed back in the 5th century and provides the city's water supply. It's a technological masterpiece. A whole network of these channels, known as qanats, extends like a spiderweb from Yazd into the surrounding country. This system also became the standard in other parts of Iran very early on. It too belongs to the UNESCO World Heritage. The water is collected in qanats outside the city of Yazd, close to the nearby mountains where the rain tends to fall. The qanat system performs with amazing consistency. There are only small variations in flow from year to year. In this dry region, a regular supply of water is an almost miraculous achievement. Yazd is on the UNESCO World Heritage List because the city and its surroundings are an outstanding example of a traditional settlement. It represents the interaction of humans and nature in a desert environment, and most of all, it is still intact architecturally and culturally. Today, Yazd remains an important center of a religion that emerged nearly 3,000 years ago and is said to have been founded by Zarathustra, a Persian poet and philosopher. There's some debate as to whether or not he actually existed at all, but the teachings of the Zoroastrian religion still survive today. They focus on the battle between good and evil, between light and darkness. It's said that good will triumph over evil on Judgment Day. Until then, people can make conscious decisions to follow the right path, the path of truth. There are 3 maxims in Zoroastrianism: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Mozart picks up on these themes in his most famous opera, The Magic Flute, when Sarastro sings, "In diesen heiligen Hallen kennt man die Rache nicht, und ist der Mensch gefallen, führt Liebe ihn zur Pflicht." It's said that Zarathustra guards a flame in the Zoroastrian temple that has burned continuously for 1,550 years as a symbol of light and goodness. In addition to the temples, the country is dotted with dakhma, or towers of silence, the most striking architectural evidence of Zoroastrian belief. One commandment of Zoroastrianism dictates that the earth be kept pure. So, in order not to pollute the ground, the bodies of the dead were kept in these towers of silence outside the city. In these stone circles, their remains were left to the elements and to the birds of prey, who picked the flesh clean off their bones. The towers remained in operation into the 1970s, when the practice was ultimately banned, for hygienic reasons, as the authorities put it. But the Zoroastrian faith lives on in Iran. As I leave this remarkable country, I recall the line of a poem by Rumi, the celebrated 13th century Persian poet. Far out, beyond our notions of orthodoxy and error in religion, there is a field, I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full for words. Here was a Muslim poet proposing that the foundation of faith lay not in a specific religious code, but in the compassion and love between humans. It sounds radical today. Rumi came up with it 700 years ago. For modern Europeans, the Middle East is both a politically contested region and a fantasy of sensuality and opulence. What we actually find here are the relics of great nations and civilizations and political cultures united and divided by religion. The UNESCO World Heritage Sites are interesting because they show us what has stood the test of time. Places recalling a world of diversity and sometimes of tolerance. Places of memory, but also, maybe, points of departure for a better future. I'm Christopher Clark, and I'm traveling the world to discover its true treasures, the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I'm in Southeast Asia, exploring the unique flora and fauna in this corner of the world and the roots of the deep spirituality that shape the local cultures. It's impossible to separate the spectacular architecture from the region's religious movements or from the great empires that rose and fell here throughout the centuries. Southeast Asia has a very special kind of magic. Its natural wonders and the secrets of the civilizations that arose here over the centuries are a big part of that. The diversity of peoples and languages, of religions and temples is absolutely fascinating. This is where two major cultures meet, the Indian and the Chinese. Perhaps that's the reason for the region's irresistible allure. That's what I hope to find out. I want to show you this vast treasure of human heritage. I'm setting out to explore its roots and discover what remains today and what needs to be preserved. I'll eventually head to Bali on this journey, but first I'm traveling to a country in the space between India and China. I'll visit fascinating Vietnam and practically unspoilt Laos. But first, my journey takes me to Cambodia, which was home to one of this planet's most astounding civilizations. As we approach the ruins through the jungle, I know how Frenchman Henri Mouhot must have felt back in 1860 when he came to Angkor Wat. His descriptions made it well known to the Western world. Today, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The famous Angkor Wat is not a palace, it's a temple dedicated to the god Vishnu. Loosely translated, the name means a city made into a temple. And in fact, Angkor Wat is the largest sacred structure ever built. It's larger than St. Peter's Basilica or the Inca temples of South America. The Apsaras, the temple dancers, and the Devatas, female guardians, still watch over this holy place today. Child monks still use the site for ceremonies and blessings. The entire architectural complex breathes the spirit of sacred rituals. The visitor cannot help but feel small before these immense structures. Angkor Wat, the temple, is an artistic highlight of the indigenous Khmer culture. And Angkor, the city, was a center of the mighty Khmer Empire. Nowadays, these ancient buildings are taken over, at least in the daylight hours, by hordes of monkeys and tourists. In the early hours of the morning, we're lucky enough to have this enormous jungle cathedral all to ourselves for a little while. The towers, designed to look like lotus blossoms, and the long galleries represent the order of the cosmos. The rulers of this place believed that they were at the center of the universe. Hinduism was the main religion of the Khmer. The idea of the Deva Raja, or god kings, comes from that faith. The rulers saw themselves as incarnations of the god Vishnu, and this meant that they were protectors of their people and allowed them certain freedoms, but could also demand complete devotion. Religion was a tool of power for them, as so often in human history. These temples are evidence of that fact. But who was behind all of this? Which ruler placed himself on an equal footing with God? There's an image of him in Angkor Wat, depicted in a relief. King Suryavarman II ascended to the throne in 1113 when he was no more than 20 years old. He expanded the influence of Angkor, then known as Cambodia, by waging war against its neighbors and transforming the city around the temple into a bustling metropolis. The temple was a place of central importance to the Khmer. This is where they all came together. And these bas-reliefs were instruments not only of religious instruction, but also of propaganda and the projection of power. They were supposed to edify a mostly illiterate people, to teach them how to live virtuously. But they were also a platform for the emperor to exhibit his power, his heroic feats, and his enormous wealth. The sheer size of ancient Angkor is astonishing. The temple's layout was meticulously planned by priests and astrologers. Angkor was the leading global city of its era and the largest pre-industrial settlement on Earth. Up to 1 million people are believed to have lived here. But what do we really know about day-to-day life in Angkor? Zhou Daguan, a Chinese diplomat and a contemporary of Marco Polo, was sent to Angkor in 1297 as part of an imperial delegation. He wrote down everything he saw, and his notes are our only evidence of what Angkor was like during its golden age. So how did the people here live their lives, and what does that tell us about their culture? The people of Angkor lived in wooden houses. Only the temples were made of stone, built to last for eternity. Every temple was reflected in a pool of water, a symbol intended to evoke the primeval ocean. Holy sites were always designed in perfect symmetry, and the tallest of the 5 towers in the middle of the complex represented the holy Meru mountain, the center of their world. Angkor was not a sad place, according to Zhou Daguan, and the reliefs we can still find in Angkor today, around 800 years later, bear out his observation. Here's a cheerful market scene. A pig roasting at an inn. The imagery suggests that Khmer men were the ones doing the cooking. The women performed other tasks. The descendants of the Khmer live in the surrounding villages, where they cultivate grain and vegetables and breed livestock. They live together as extended families, and even today, you get the impression that the women play the leading role, as they did back in the era of the old Khmer when the kings still reigned. Not only do they raise the children, they also organize the entire community and tend to the animals. In the late 13th century, a new king, Jayavarman VII, also brought a new religion to Angkor, Buddhism. Even today, next to the Bayon temple commissioned by the king, there's a monastery inhabited primarily by child monks. And benevolent Buddha faces carved into the towers of the holy site smile down on all beneath them. Jayavarman built his own temple, and so did all the other rulers of Angkor, which is why there's no shortage of them here. The reliefs on the exterior walls depict the construction of the temples of Angkor over the centuries. They were very proud of this work. There were great builders and engineers among the Khmer. How was it even possible to erect these temples in the middle of the Cambodian jungle? The Khmer were gifted engineers, and they did a little trick. They used laterite to construct the temple. When the stone is wet, it's easy to work with. It hardens quickly, and once it does, it lasts for an eternity. That's one reason why we can still admire Angkor Wat and the other temples today. Of course, this porous stone isn't particularly pretty. So when the temple was complete, a sandstone facade was added to the entire structure to make it worthy of the god Vishnu. Many vivid colors and a lot of gold added to the spectacular power of this holy place. Since the city was abandoned, nature has been reclaiming the territory that the Khmer once wrested from the jungle's grasp. This is particularly evident in Ta Prohm, a temple the king commissioned for his mother. Roots enfold the masonry like the tentacles of an enormous kraken, compressing it as they grow. Although this was a Buddhist temple, we still find motifs from the time when Hinduism dominated Angkor. It's a connection between the eras and the religions, likely arising from the tolerance and respect the Khmer held for their ancestors, who still worshipped the god Vishnu. Strangler figs and silk cotton trees captured Ta Prohm. Botanists have found more than 150 species of tree in the temple complex alone. Many devatas watch over the temple, which was constructed in the late 12th century as a monastery. Over 12,000 people lived in the temple district. The surrounding villages had to serve the king's mother and her royal monastery. To get a sense of the former size of the city of Angkor, you really need to take to the skies. We lifted off in a tethered balloon. It wasn't until just a few years ago that researchers discovered just how massive Angkor actually was. All of this was Angkor. The extent of this city corresponded roughly to the size of today's Berlin. Using laser satellite imagery, a team of researchers from France and Australia was able to determine just how big the largest metropolis of the Middle Ages actually was, and they made an exact map. Every overgrown ruin, every trace of human development was recorded. It was a sensational project. A carefully planned and well-connected city became visible. Every block was separated from the next by a street or a canal. The two enormous water basins are particularly eye-catching. For the Khmer, they were more than just symbols of the primeval ocean. They were also, and perhaps more importantly, a reservoir for irrigating rice fields. Angkor's wealth came mainly from rice farming. These immense waterworks, reservoirs, dams and canals were just as central to Khmer culture as their temples. But their true dimensions really only become apparent when you cross them by boat. This 8-kilometer-long water basin collected the monsoon floodwaters from the mountains for use in the fields, and the entire city was supplied with water from here via stone canals, an impressive feat by the 12th and 13th century engineers. They were incredibly creative architects. The Khmer knew a lot about water management, explains Hang Peu, hydrologist of the region.
The water played the role very important for the stability of the temple. So it means all the Khmer temple built based on the water. The Khmer don't have the technique to make the foundation. And the soil in Siem Reap, it's very soft soil. It cannot support very heavy load. So the way they discovered is just to combine the technique in between the sand and water. And we can experience by ourselves to know how strong it is about the sand and water when we go on the beach. When we go on the beach, you can walk through the part that the sand is very humid. Your foot never sink. But the part the sand dry, your foot will be sink. So they use that kind of the technique, to support our heavy temple.
One of the last Khmer rulers is rumored to have said, "When the water around this temple disappears, our city's end is nigh." The powerful empire collapsed in the early 15th century. Climate change was one of the reasons why the Khmer had to leave this wonderful place they'd created for themselves. But megalomania and extensive human destruction of the surrounding natural world were also part of the problem. Angkor is a reminder of our own impermanence. My next destination is Cambodia's neighbor, Laos, and the city of Luang Prabang, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The vast Mekong River will carry me there. At more than 4,000 kilometers, it is Southeast Asia's longest river and the region's lifeline. The river peacefully wends its way through jungle landscapes and steep canyons into Laos, the former kingdom established in the 14th century. Even here on the river, it already feels like we're traveling into another world and another era. "100 years ago, when British explorer James McCarthy first saw the temple roofs of the city of Luang Prabang from afar, he thought for a few seconds that he was witnessing a celestial phenomenon. Yet when he docked his boat and entered the city, he was filled with a deep melancholy, because even then he realized that this was a world that belonged to the past. And yet it still exists today. In Luang Prabang, we can experience another era. UNESCO named Luang Prabang a World Heritage Site because it is actually one of the only cities in Southeast Asia that has been so well maintained and preserved through turbulent centuries. Over the last 25 years, the temples and houses have been painstakingly restored using traditional techniques, all under the strict supervision of UNESCO. The buildings here are constructed in a highly distinctive style. The richness of Luang Prabang architecture reflects the mix of styles and materials in this region. The restoration has breathed new life into this remarkable place. The people in Luang Prabang are still proud that their city was once the royal residence and the capital of Laos. But during the civil war of the 1960s and 70s, communist troops entered the city and carted the monarch and his family off to a re-education camp. It's believed that the king and his wife died there. Today, life is tranquil in the secluded Mekong Valley where Luang Prabang is nestled. Mass tourism hasn't yet transformed this corner of the world, but Chinese tourism is growing, and Laos is at risk of slowly losing its distinctive character. It's hard to imagine that this place was once a Southeast Asian powerhouse. Serpent symbols can be found everywhere in Laos. They are believed to protect the inhabitants of buildings. And the elephant's a reference to the name of the ancient empire. Luang Prabang was the capital of Lang San, the powerful empire of the million elephants, and the seat of the kings of Laos for centuries. The country was founded by Phà Ngum. The son of royal rulers, Phà Ngum was born with 33 teeth. Consequently, he was thought to be cursed and was abandoned on the Mekong River. A Khmer king found him and raised him as his own. As a young man, Phà Ngum returned to his homeland, conquered all the small principalities in this region, established the kingdom of Laos, and spread the word of Buddha. Buddhism still dominates the atmosphere in Luang Prabang today. The gong dictates the pace of the monks' lives, the beginning and end of their work, prayers, and meals. There are about 40 Buddhist monasteries here, but this one, Wat Sieng Tong, is the most important. It's centered on an ordination hall built in 1560. Frowning eaves sweep low to the ground. We're speaking with a young monk. Satupan, how did Buddhism come to this place in Laos?
Buddhism arrived with King Phan Gung in the 14th century, and with him came the Prabang, the most important likeness of Buddha in Laos. It gave the city its name and is still in our monastery today.
Kam Jai Lilai, Satupan. Wat Sieng Tong means Temple of the Golden City. This is where the kings of Laos were crowned, and today it is the country's most sacred Buddhist holy site. The temple was founded by King Sethathirat. It survived all the wars of conquest, lootings, and pillages Luang Prabang has seen over the centuries. Many Buddhist believers are convinced that the serpent god who resides where the Mekong and Nam Khan rivers meet protects the sanctuary. There are patterned teak wood pillars supporting the roof. They are stenciled in gold on red or black lacquer with floral motifs, animals, scenes of daily life, and Buddhist tales. On one of the walls, a depiction of the heavens with the Buddha and several deities, the earth with people and trees. Sitting on an elaborate pedestal is the principal image of Buddha in the Bhumisparsha Mudra, his right hand touching the earth. A very special exception has been made for us. We've been permitted to attend a religious service for the monastery's monks and initiates. Many male Laotians join a monastery for at least some period of their lives. At an early age, they learn Buddhist rituals such as the ancient chants and the sutras, but they also attend a regular school. In fact, for many of them, joining a monastery is their only option for education, especially if they come from rural areas. And life far away from home is not easy for the novices. Most of them can visit their families only once a year. It's impossible to imagine Southeast Asia without Buddhism. Buddhism sets the pace of life in this part of the world, and that's especially palpable here in Luang Prabang. Since its founding in the 14th century, the city has been a religious center for all Buddhists, and you can't help but feel that Buddha, who influences every aspect of life here, has been elevated to the status of a god, although he never saw himself that way. At daybreak, monks from all the city's monasteries head out to participate in a Buddhist ritual. This tradition has lived on in Luang Prabang for centuries. The ritual is known as takpat. The monks walk the streets barefoot, accepting rice from the city's residents. The donors acquire spiritual merit and feel closer to Buddha. In a part of the world where mass tourism has for the most part swept everything before it, Luang Prabang really is an intact enclave from another time. As I leave Laos, I become aware of the fragility of these places and of the spirit that breathes life into them. My journey through the infinite diversity of Southeast Asia continues. My next destination is the world's largest island nation, Indonesia. The island of Bali in the Indian Ocean is also part of this country. It's home to an overwhelmingly Hindu society in a predominantly Muslim state. This is a world of volcanoes, lush rainforests, and carefully cultivated rice terraces. Rice cultivation was invented in China at least 8,000 years ago, and it made its way to the Indonesian islands via trading routes. Even in the earliest documents discovered in Bali, rice cultivation is mentioned as a vital source of subsistence for the island. The fertile volcanic soil offers ideal conditions, but rice still needs abundant water to grow. And water is sacred to the Balinese. The ceremonies held in the days before the Balinese New Year festivities are a living example of this belief. Immersion in water is believed to purify the soul and to free it from sin. The sea is one source of purification and healing, and in the Balinese hills, an ancient system of cascading terraces and dikes, known as subaks, captures rain and spring water, preserving, controlling, and distributing it for the rice terraces used by the farming cooperatives. But the subaks are more than an irrigation system. They are a form of communal social organization, bound together with shared duty and festivities. An entire culture evolved around this idea, centered on the meticulous joint management of a precious natural resource. And today the subaks of Bali are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Pulau Dewata, the island of the gods, is what the Balinese call their home. And they say that the gods provide the water that flows in abundance on this island. The islanders make rich offerings to their gods to ensure their favor, so that the springs never run dry. You can find temples at many of the springs and water reservoirs on the island, more than 20,000 in total. Temples to local deities, state temples of former kingdoms, and temples dedicated to animal gods, like the holy monkey king, Hanuman. For Indian Hindus too, Hanuman, as one of the reincarnations of Shiva, is among the most important deities. The Bat Temple Pura Goa Lava is considered one of Bali's most important holy sites. At its heart is a cave that is home to thousands of bats. According to Balinese belief, the cave that leads deep into the mountain forms a connection with the underworld. Since the 11th century, the Balinese have held ceremonies here in the hope of making contact with the souls of their departed ancestors. As we can see, the temples of Bali are more than just relics of a past era. They are the site of opulent celebrations where countless offerings are carried to the temple, protected by ceremonial parasols. The ceremonies perform the idea of harmony between the worshippers, gods, nature, and the whole of humanity. The offerings consist of up to 300 different types of plants and fruits. First, they are presented to the deities in a procession, then served up on the altars. Gods and departed ancestors descend from heaven to the earthly temples to be celebrated. After 10 days, they return to heaven. With these tributes received, the gods of Bali will continue to ensure that the monsoons keep the rice fields fertile and the sacred water never stops flowing from the springs. This Balinese approach to life is thousands of years old, but today it is more modern than ever because it treats nature not as a reserve to be exploited and consumed, but as a force in its own right and an equal partner. The island worlds of Southeast Asia, where the Pacific and Indian Oceans meet, are among this planet's greatest natural wonders. I'm on my way to Vietnam, to Ha Long Bay with its spectacular limestone formations that rose from the water over 300 million years ago. Lush vegetation blankets these uninhabited islands, some of which jut hundreds of meters out of the water. A number of the dense jungles are home to plants that can only be found here. But the idyllic atmosphere is deceptive. Storms and hurricanes have sunk many ships and claimed many lives. The bay can be dangerous, but its strangeness and beauty are breathtaking. The Vietnamese love myths and legends, and the story of this bay is no exception. Ha Long means something like the dragon from the mountains. As the story goes, this dragon saved the Vietnamese people when they were once again under threat from northern invaders. The Vietnamese were facing defeat in a sea battle when the Jade Emperor god sent a whole family of dragons to assist them in the bay. The dragons rained fire on their enemies and spat enormous jagged emeralds into the bay, driving off the invaders. Those emeralds became the 3,000 islands we now see here. I'm looking for the families of the fishermen who make their home on Ha Long Bay. They live on houseboats connected to one another by planks to create a floating village. The Vietnamese authorities would prefer to relocate these fishermen to dry land, but the villagers love the freedom of living on the water, and they have done for hundreds of years. Each village is an independent entity. This particular community does not admit tourists, and visitors are a rarity. The floating villages are their own little world. A fisherman's family has invited us in. We're only meeting the men. The women are too shy. Smartphones are rare here, and televisions are nowhere to be found. When they aren't out fishing, they tell each other stories or play cards.
Xin chào, xin chào. Xin chào quê hương.
What about the next generation, your little boy, for example? Will the next generation of your family be able to live on the water as you have?
Life here isn't easy, but we love it. And I hope my children and grandchildren will feel the same. When you are away from this place, you miss it. We used to live in Ba Hang, but the fishing grounds are better here. We hope that future generations will be able to make a living here.
As we leave, I have to wonder how much longer this archaic floating world will actually survive, because the bay is under threat. Modern Vietnam could really use those dragons again today for an entirely different rescue mission. The bay is currently under threat from extreme pollution. In the floating village, the fishermen told me that they often catch more plastic garbage than fish in their nets. And untreated wastewater from industrial plants and ships flows directly into the bay. I'm speaking to Tran Van Hien from the Ha Long Institute for Environmental Research to find out what's being done to solve these problems.
We want to preserve the magic of Ha Long Bay for generations to come. So there is only one strategy. We need to place very strict limits on the number of ships allowed into the bay, as well as on the locations that tourists are permitted to visit.
UNESCO named the bay a World Heritage Site and has commissioned a range of programs to support the efforts to rescue this unique ecosystem. We can only hope that they'll succeed. Ha Long is also a world of caves and grottos that formed in the limestone karsts over millions of years. Many legends have grown up around these often enormous caves. Stories of good and evil spirits said to live in them, and of the Mandarin who held young girls captive in his grotto. It's just a little eerie all alone in this cave. There are thousands of such caves around Ha Long Bay, and in many of them you can hear the same sound. Can you hear it? It's like the rumor of distant drums, and legend has it that these are the echoes of ancient battles, of which there have been so many in Vietnamese history. During the last Vietnam War, Vietnamese soldiers would often hide in such caves to protect themselves from American air raids. And central Vietnam is the home of the world's largest cave complex, the Han Son Doong Cave, which was discovered in 1990. Today, it's a UNESCO World Natural Heritage Site. The cave is located in Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park, in a wild, primeval mountain landscape. The limestone karst formed 400 million years ago. It's one of the oldest in Asia. The landscape is dominated by dense tropical jungles and little rivers. Hang Son Doong Cave is 9 kilometers long and up to 200 meters high at some points. You could fit Cologne Cathedral inside it. Enormous stalactites alternate with cave pearls formed by dripping water. A local man discovered the cave in 1991 when he was collecting wood in the jungle. He noticed steam curling out of a crack in the rock and assumed there must be a hollow space behind it. As he moved deeper into the jungle, he eventually discovered the entrance, not knowing, of course, that he had just found the largest cave in the world. Exploration of the cave is still far from complete, and it may turn out to be connected to other caves in the national park. Some of the neighboring caves were sacred to the Cham people who lived here in the 9th and 10th centuries. Remnants of altars where the Cham worshipped their gods have been found here, and it's easy to understand why they chose these spots. Everything here feels otherworldly. It's amazing how little is yet known about the plant life in Hang Son Doong. Plants have been discovered that only exist here, ferns, palms, and other jungle species that have never been seen before. When you leave the cool, mysterious, and musty world of the Vietnamese caves, it's a relief to be back in the sunlight, but at the same time, you want to go back because you have the feeling that there might have been something new to discover just around the next corner. After the solitude of the caves, I'm actually looking forward to a bit of city life. I'm traveling to the old imperial town of Hue, famous for its gardens and palaces. You can sense that this forbidden city used to be a seat of power. In a stunning location on the Song Huong, the Perfume River, this city was suddenly jolted from its sleepy provincial existence when it was named the capital. Emperor Jia Long of the Nguyen dynasty commissioned the construction of a fortress in 1802. It took 30 years to build. The emperor's family and a select group of elites were the only ones permitted to enter the inner city. For 150 years, the Nguyen dynasty played Little Beijing here in the Hue Citadel. Their forbidden city is modeled closely, in a more modest register, on the forbidden city of the Chinese emperors in Beijing, and the Nguyen too saw themselves as sons of heaven. It's not unlike those lesser German princes who modeled their 18th century courts on the Versailles of the French Sun King. The courtly life of the Nguyen was correspondingly lavish, and it remained so even after the Vietnamese emperors became little more than puppets of the French colonial rulers. And in old photos, the emperor and his court really do look like marionettes, displaced from time. The emperor's ornate gold throne remains, as if he and his retinue might return here at any moment. Even as the French extended their control across Indochina, a highly distinctive courtly culture evolved here. The citadel was a world within a city. There were temples, buildings for the royal household, ornamental gardens, shady paths, and long, airy passageways. Everything was designed in strict accordance with the ancient rules of Chinese architecture. The structures were intended to radiate harmony, but also to project power. And in 1968, during the Vietnam War, American and South Vietnamese troops fought bitterly with the Viet Cong on this exact spot. Mr. Nguyen, do you remember the American attack on Hue?
At that time, I stayed here, in this city. In the Tet Offensive in 1968, the whole city was in the area of bomb runs from American aircrafts and artillery coordinates. The whole city, from the Forbidden City to Chuang Duc Gate, Chan Tai Gate, and the whole imperial palace was located in the coordinates of bombs dropped and shots fired. How horrible it was. The war heavily devastated. There was a lot of damage in citadels and palaces. 1/3 of all construction units that were magnificent buildings and palaces of the past were devastated. There are 300 construction units and structures remaining with heavy damage. What an unfortunate fate.
The Battle of Hue in January 1968 was one of the bloodiest of the Vietnam War. Hue and the old imperial residence were attacked and occupied by the Viet Cong. The South Vietnamese army, assisted by the Americans, attempted to recapture them. The battle involved brutal urban warfare and bombings and napalm attacks by the Americans on the citadel. The Americans and the South Vietnamese army were ultimately victorious, and they raised the flag of South Vietnam over the entrance gate. I begin to realize what an important symbol this place is. Militarily, the Battle of Hue was a victory for the Americans and the South Vietnamese, but in political terms, it marked the beginning of the end of America's involvement in Vietnam and in all of Indochina. Munitions like these from the Battle for Hue during the Vietnam War are still lying everywhere on the ground here. They're traces of history. Sites like this are places of memory. They open a gate into the past. Today, this war remains both a trauma and a source of pride for the Vietnamese, all the more reason to make sure this ancient cultural heritage is preserved. Under the supervision of UNESCO, the Hue Citadel and Forbidden City are being restored, including the last emperor's library. Tai Kong Nguyen is showing me how craftsmen from Hue are restoring everything. The ancestors of some of the foremen practiced these ancient techniques as they worked on the old imperial palace.
This was the king's reading room. This building was also damaged in the war, and we couldn't start restoring it until now. The craftsmen here are practicing a traditional Vietnamese trade. It's called son tap. It's a type of lacquer painting. And this lacquer can only be found in Vietnam. It has existed for hundreds of years. We want to make sure that the restoration of these monuments is completely authentic.
So much has been achieved here, but much remains to be done. The Sung An Palace, close to the tomb of Emperor To Duc, has survived wars and floods. It too is now being restored to its original state.
We have found remaining patterns on the walls and columns, and we are now restoring them to preserve the unique style of the whole site.
Imperial power began to wane in Vietnam with Emperor Tu Duc, who ascended to the throne in 1847, but became a vassal of the French. He preferred writing poetry in his pavilions to the business of ruling. The Emperor Tu Duc can't have been a particularly happy man. This small, finely made individual is said to have been prone to melancholy. In an epitaph that he wrote for himself, he does praise his own virtues and achievements, but he also admits his many mistakes. His reluctance to take the initiative in the struggle against the French colonizers, for example, or the fact that he and his empress failed to produce an heir to the throne. Perhaps he'd simply overexerted himself with his 103 concubines. Every summer, the emperor and a bevy of concubines selected for their beauty would retreat to this tomb complex, which he had commissioned 3,000 laborers to build for him. Here he would recite his own mournful poems. In the evenings, they would bring him a special tea of dewdrops harvested from lotus flowers. And by the way, the concubines were expected to remain faithful to him until death. After his demise, they moved out of the Forbidden City to mourn and pray here until they eventually went to their own graves. The Emperor's tomb in Hue City is another World Heritage Site. It's a place of quite extraordinary grace. This spirit screen was intended to protect the ruler from wind and demons in his eternal rest. Each ceramic shard is charged with meaning. Emperor Tu Duc was a weak ruler, but he was a talented poet. He wrote countless lines of verse during his rule. One of his poems praises the city of Hue. "O Hue, mournful girl, come here, forget reality." And as he turned away from the world, Tu Duc intensified his commerce with the gods, who played an important role at the imperial court of Hue. Essential to the ritual life of the court was a uniquely Vietnamese style of courtly music that evolved from the 15th century but reached a high point under the Nguyen dynasty in the 19th century. Today, Na Nak music is labeled as intangible cultural heritage. The instruments on which it's played cannot be found anywhere else in the world. This is a beautiful instrument. What's its name?
Đàn nhị.
Đàn nhị.
Đàn tam.
Đàn tam.
Đàn tam.
Đàn tam.
Phát tiền.
Phát tiền.
Sánh tiền.
Sanh tiền. Southeast Asia has been plagued by war for much of its history and repeatedly subjugated by foreign rulers. The Chinese came to Vietnam in several waves of conquest, followed later by the French and then the Japanese, who were soon supplanted by the Americans. The region's cultural heritage is of all the more importance. The treasures of Southeast Asia's ancient past and the pride in this history can be a source of strength in the face of an uncertain future, particularly here in Vietnam. Losing oneself in the past is no solution to the predicaments of the present. The fate of Tu Duc reminds us of that. But an awareness of the past and of its traces in the present can be a source of stability. Others were here before us. Of what they thought and built, much was destroyed, and something has survived. There is humility, and there is also hope in that insight, and we shouldn't underestimate its power, especially in times of rapid change. I'm I'm Christopher Clark, and I'm traveling the world to discover its true treasures, the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The baffling complexity of India, the depth of its history, the endless layers of language, culture, and myth have always fascinated me. India is a study in contrasts, rich and poor, sacred and profane, thronging megacities and dreaming landscapes full of ancient trees. Nearly 1.4 billion people live here, and yet there's a mysterious feeling of unity. What holds it all together? India is a voice that speaks to us, and not just in its hundreds of languages and countless dialects. This country speaks to our senses, with all the power of the rulers and religions, all the peoples and cultures that have left their mark on this enormous subcontinent over the millennia. India is the sound of a cosmos, much more than the sum of its parts. And that's what makes this country at once so rich and so bewildering. Some of the most important traces of the country's past can be found in the locations that UNESCO has named as World Heritage Sites. Same ki si ki pratiksha nahi karta, says the Hindu proverb. Time waits for no man. On that note, I'd better get cracking. My journey will take me to Elephanta Island in the Arabian Sea off the coast of Mumbai, to Rajasthan, to Delhi, and to Agra with the Taj Mahal, and after a detour to visit the tigers of Sundarbans National Park, to the Himalayan foothills. But it begins on the Ganges in Varanasi. If you want to understand India, Varanasi should be your first port of call. It's the spiritual heart of the country, on the banks of the Ganges, the river gifted to the earth by the goddess Ganga. The goddess offers the hope of life after death and the cleansing of sins, and the candles and lotus blossoms that float on her waters are physical prayers. Pilgrims have been traveling to this city for more than 2,500 years. All of them want to bathe in the Ganges, and many would like to die and be cremated here as well. This spirituality shapes the entire country. You encounter it at every step along the way, but especially on the shores of its waters. India's rivers are its true temples. They are the arteries of India's sacred geography. They've long been considered holy since many years before the first temple was ever constructed. And for people here, they provide a sense of belonging. That's especially palpable in Varanasi. Here, the Ganges is the equivalent of a cathedral in the Christian world. When you're in it, you are close to the gods. That's why this river is a common point of reference for all Hindus. But the very name of this country, India, also stems from a river, the Indus. Rivers have always shaped the life and culture of this subcontinent. Indians revere not only the Ganges, but also the Brahmaputra, the Indus, and many other rivers. Rivers play an important role in nearly all religious rituals, and they're not just a symbol of life. In many places, they are its literal source. But now I'm heading for an island off the west coast of India. We take a boat from Mumbai, once known as Bombay, a city built on islands and reclaimed from the sea. The roots of Hinduism, and consequently the roots of India, can be explored at a UNESCO World Heritage Site on Garapuri Island, which was later called Elephanta in the Arabian Sea. After we've traveled 7 nautical miles, the island slowly emerges from the morning haze. The cut stone sculptures here mainly date back to the era of the Kalachuri dynasty, which ruled here in the 6th and 7th centuries. But Elephanta was always a spiritual place. The small Buddhist stupa mounds on the island date back to 200 BC. Religious processions and sacrificial rituals were part of everyday life here, and to honor Shiva, 6 enormous cave temples were carved from the basalt rocks. The largest of them is 40 meters deep with a ceiling up to 5 meters high. I wonder what awaits me here. The temple was created to honor Shiva, and its architecture and the symbols found here invoke the divine presence of the greatest of all gods. 2 stone guardians watch over the center of the temple. Lord Shiva is like a kind of cosmic jigsaw puzzle. You can put him together, you can take him apart, and even the individual pieces of the puzzle possess the fullness of his power. This, for example, is the Shiva Lingam, the penis of Lord Shiva. And here especially, you can feel his creative power. Hindu belief and symbology are finely rendered in the overall planning of the caves. The layout, including the pillar components, is a landmark of rock-cut architecture. The combination of aesthetic beauty and sculptural technique reached an apogee at the Elephanta Caves. Elephanta is one of the hearts of India's spiritual life. UNESCO named this place a World Heritage Site in recognition of its relationship with the origins of the ancient Hindu religion. And here we meet Lord Shiva, one of the most important divine powers in the Hindu cosmos. Shiva unites all contradictions within himself. But why is he shown here with 3 faces? Because he creates, maintains, and destroys. He embodies the harmony of the world in contradiction. There's nothing monolithic about Hinduism. Its forms are endlessly various, but they always come back to an order of the world and of the people in it that is enclosed within an eternal cycle. Shiva appears here as a being between man and woman, with Nandi, the bull, a gate guardian deity. The pillars symbolize the universe that Shiva destroys in a cosmic dance, only to rebuild it again. Everything in the cave is focused on this eternal cycle of life, but nothing else in this religion is set in stone. Hinduism has never been centered on a single holy book full of commandments and prohibitions and strict injunctions in the manner of Christianity and Islam. The faith and the faithful themselves are an open book that is continuously being written. This process still shapes the country today. 80% of Indians are Hindus. The desire for contact with the divine world continues unabated in India. In fact, it's growing in importance even for younger generations. This religion thrives on recurring rituals that also shape the everyday lives of Hindus. Young priests, known as pandits, swing lamps. The fire links this world and the spirit world. When the faithful come together for ceremonies like the Ganga Aarti, it feels like a fun fair, and it's just as loud as if the revelers want to make sure that the gods up in heaven can hear them. When the writer and the world traveler Mark Twain was in Varanasi, he believed he could sense the roots of all religions here. The city, he wrote, was older than history, older than tradition, older than legend itself. While life on the banks of the Ganges revolves around piety and spirituality, the state of Rajasthan is all about power and beauty. In the 18th century, the Maharaja of Jaipur commissioned the construction of the water palace Jal Mahal just outside the gates of his city on an artificial lake. It was a pleasure palace and a luxurious perch for the duck hunting he enjoyed so much. Jaipur is the capital of Rajasthan, a colorful and somewhat chaotic metropolis with more than 4 million residents. This place brings together all the cultures of India. The skyline is full of temples and minarets. Modern and ancient things are jumbled together in a maze of roads that appear to have no names. In Jaipur, you can learn, in a very first-hand and visceral way, just how Indian street life works. The heart of Jaipur is still the Maharaja's palace, built by the same Rajput dynasty that founded this royal state. Their origins remain a mystery even today. The Rajputs, which roughly translates as sons of kings, lived together in clans that they called brotherhoods. They were exceptionally gifted, proud warriors with an elaborate code of honor, and they saw themselves as descendants of the gods, bearers of a tradition as old as the world itself. For Hindus, this attitude must have seemed quite arrogant, but depictions from the time indicate that the princes really did view themselves as divine. They lived in the many kingdoms that once made up Rajasthan. With the Rajasthanis, a unique and independent civilization arose within India, with impregnable fortresses whose interiors they built into exquisite fairy tale palaces. These ruling families reigned for 1,000 years. They successfully battled the Persians and the Turks, the powerful Mughals, and the Sultans of Delhi. Their kings, the Maharajas, were always the embodiment of romantic chivalry. Rajasthan is crisscrossed with walls, relics of an era of never-ending wars that demanded the construction of strong defenses high up on the mountain peaks. They wind their way through this rugged countryside. The long wall around Fort Kumbhalgarh is known as India's Great Wall, a reference to the Chinese fortification system. There were 23 kingdoms in total, each ruled by a Raja. The most important mountain fortresses are cleverly distributed across Rajasthan, a territory approximately the size of Germany. UNESCO named the forts as World Heritage Sites, partly because they demonstrate how the Rajputs protected their knightly culture from external hostilities between the 11th and 18th centuries. Islamic conquerors in particular were becoming a threat. And here you can see how together they form a protective ring, always commanding the highest ground. The Amber Fort, with its massive walls of marble and sandstone, is one of the largest and most beautiful mountain palaces in Rajasthan. Today, Amber is one of the most visited spots in India, along with the Taj Mahal. These elephants are used to carry tourists up to the Amber Fort. India has now decided that this trade should be shut down. It's now illegal to capture elephants in the wild and to place them in the service of human beings in this way. It's regarded as cruel, inappropriate for these animals, and I think actually I'd rather walk. Inside and out, Amber Fort is the perfect symbol of power, an ideal symbiosis between an impregnable fortress and a sumptuous palace. There were audience halls, treasure chambers, pavilions, and elaborate gardens, and safe behind these massive walls, the ruling families lived luxurious lives. The Sheesh Mahal, the elaborate hall of mirrors, natural light is reflected by tens of thousands of tiny Venetian mirrors. At night, the entire hall could be lit with a single candle. This is India's Versailles. The Amber Fort served as the Maharaja's seat of power for almost 700 years, until they moved to the new capital of their kingdom, Jaipur. Officially, there haven't been any Maharajas in India for half a century. Even the legendary wealth of these former rulers is largely gone. The Maharajas lost most of the gold and jewels they had once had in abundance, as well as their palaces and estates. But some families still remain extremely wealthy. The current Maharaja of Jaipur ascended the throne at 12. He's 21 today. When he's not playing polo all over the world, he celebrates traditional festivals with the people in the courtyard of the palace. The fire is intended to drive off evil spirits, and everyone is welcome to take some fire home with them on a wooden stick. Behind the palace walls, there are still relics of the old times. This Ganga Jali is the largest object made of solid silver anywhere in the world. It was built in 1894 by the then Maharaja to store holy Ganges water for his use and the use of his family. In 1902, when he traveled to England to take part in the coronation of Edward VII, the Maharaja took 2 of these things with him. Fortunately, it was a short visit. The 4,000 litres of stored Ganges water sufficed to cover the Maharaja's needs, which was just as well because he didn't trust the British water supply. The most famous landmark in Jaipur is the Hawa Mahal, the Palace of the Winds. For the numerous ladies of the court who were not permitted to mix with commoners, the palace was a place where they could observe the everyday lives of normal people, which they naturally found very exotic. Jaipur was founded by Maharaja Jai Singh II. He ascended the throne in 1699 when he was just 11 years old, and he went on to reign for nearly half a century. He built this city and he named it after himself, Jaipur. The word Jai wasn't just his name, it also means victory. And Jaipur, this city of victory, became a flourishing metropolis. Over time, the warlike Rajputs became the peace-loving inhabitants of a commercial, urban culture. The pink blush that suffuses this cityscape dates back to 1876, when the British Prince, Albert Edward, visited Jaipur. The then Maharaja ordered that every building be painted pink. And even today, the residents of the old city of Jaipur are required to paint their houses pink. If they don't, the city government does it for them and sends them the bill. Jai Singh's true passion was astronomy. It looks like a modern sculpture park, doesn't it? But this Jantar Mantar was built just under 300 years ago. Along with his palace, Maharaja Jai Singh commissioned the construction of 19 astronomical instruments, including the world's largest sundial. It's 27 meters tall. Jai Singh was not just a popular Maharaja, but also a formidable thinker and inventor. At the age of 13, he developed an irrigation system for the hanging gardens of his fort, and he reached for the stars. He was a passionate astronomer. This enormous observatory was Jai Singh's brainchild. He knew that in astronomy, size matters. The bigger an instrument is, the more precise are its measurements. Even after almost 300 years, everything works here as it did on the first day. And in fact, he was able to prove that local time in Jaipur deviated from the official time mandated by the capital city of Delhi by exactly 2 seconds. These instruments could even predict the intensity of a coming monsoon, which was absolutely invaluable for farming. When the monsoon rains come to India between June and September, the Ganges alone holds more water than all the rivers in Western Europe combined. Only the Amazon exceeds this volume, and the rivers have been depositing sediment at their mouths for millions of years. The fertile earth extends kilometers deep at some points. India's rivers are a vital lifeline. India's fabled riches attracted Islamic rulers from the northwest around the year 1000, and along with these new dynasties, merchants, artists and scholars came to cities like Delhi, bringing an entire culture with them. The buildings and gardens created by architects from the Islamic world are what we might today describe as typically Indian. The powerful Mughal Empire, which spanned almost the entire Indian subcontinent and lasted nearly 300 years, has its roots here. The Muslim rulers were known as Mughals or emperors. They originally came as conquerors from Afghanistan and brought their religion, Islam, with them. It became the second most prevalent faith in India after Hinduism. The Mughals had a highly developed courtly culture. The showpieces of their architecture communicate their unique understanding of death, paradise, and universal rule. Symbols of that understanding can be found everywhere in India. A few kilometers south of Delhi, the archaeological area of Qutb contains funerary buildings and 2 mosques, including the oldest in northern India, built of materials reused from some 20 Brahmin temples. Built in the early 13th century, the red sandstone tower of Qutb Minar is one of the highest minarets in the world, 72.5 meters high. This is why UNESCO made it a World Heritage Site. In the 16th century, the Mughal Empire was firmly established, and its influence could be felt everywhere. The great Mughal Humayun is symbolic of this development. The face of an entire culture changed. This was not Humayun's palace. Rather, it's his modest tomb in Delhi, the earliest example of Mughal architecture in India. A woman commissioned the construction of this mausoleum. She was Humayun's widow. She hired a Persian architect and personally oversaw the works for 9 years. Hamida Banu Begum, that was her name, even set up camp in these gardens to keep an eye on everything. She was the mother of Humayun's son Akbar, the most legendary Mughal of all. When he was off on a conquest or traveling across his extensive empire, he left the business of governing to his highly intelligent mother. It's striking what powerful figures the women of these Islamic dynasties were and how they were revered, and how for a very long time an open and generous form of Islam was practiced here. The people valued religious tolerance, music, literature, and painting. Later on, this tomb served as a model for the Taj Mahal, which was a declaration of love to a woman. The Taj Mahal on the Yamuna River is considered one of the most beautiful examples of Muslim architecture in India. The mausoleum was commissioned by the great Mughal Shah Jahan in memory of his beloved wife. She died in 1631 while giving birth to their 14th child. More than 20,000 laborers worked on the construction of the Taj Mahal. 1,000 elephants transported material to Agra from all over Asia. It's said that the great Mughal had the bricklayers and even the architects' fingers cut off so that they could never create anything as spectacular again. Today, the Taj Mahal is one of the most famous buildings in the world and India's greatest landmark. Without the Humayun Mausoleum in Delhi as a model, it never would have been built, says art historian Ratish Nanda.
This was a political statement more than anything else. It was the grandeur of this structure on a never-before scale, never before seen in the Islamic world, was a statement that Akbar and the Mughals were making, saying, you know, we are here to stay, and this is who we are.
Nothing in this tomb is reminiscent of death. Everything is broken down into geometric shapes, into symmetries, cubes, arches, and ornaments. Time is suspended, it has been transformed into space. The dormitory of the Mughals, Humayun's mausoleum was called, because in addition to Humayun himself, the building serves as the final resting place for 160 of his family members. Humayun's son, Akbar the Great, became the most important ruler in the country's history. To the Indians, he must have been what Charlemagne was to the Europeans.
Akbar really employed Islamic geometry as defined in the Holy Quran in the building of this mausoleum and the adjoining gardens. Now, the Holy Quran repeatedly promises the faithful gardens beneath which rivers flow as their final resting space. And it must have been a huge challenge to have flowing water on the plains, but the 4 rivers of paradise were represented by the 4 axial pathways, and each of the 4 quadrants was then subdivided into 8 plots, because paradise is Hasht Bihisht, or 8 spaces of paradise. And what is very interesting is that the building plan is also following the same Quranic geometry, and the plan is the introduction of the Hasht Bihisht plan with 8 chambers around the central chamber built in here. So what is interesting for me at Humayun's tomb is this building has absolutely no precedence anywhere in India or the Islamic world.
How do you preserve an enormous 16th century building that has been named a World Heritage Site? Thousands of craftsmen worked for 6 years to restore the mausoleum, which was on the verge of falling into disrepair. And before the restoration work began, years of research went into determining which stones and paints the original craftsmen had used.
So for us to restore that reminder was extremely important. And we were very fortunate that we were able to figure out the exact patterns of the tile work. But the craft skill having died out, we invited craftsmen from Samarkand and trained local youth in these works. But it took us about 20,000 samples of testing to really make the lapis blue. There are also 5 other colors. There's turquoise blue, yellow, 2 shades of green and white. But lapis blue, which is used predominantly in buildings in this Nizamuddin area, took us about 2 years to work out.
At some point, Akbar the Great relocated his capital. He'd been looking for a silent place for an almost sacred landscape and finally decided to build Fatehpur Sikri near Agra. At the time, there were only small villages and farms, a bucolic atmosphere perfect for contemplation and the right place for Akbar to establish his new capital. On the way to the palace, there are small hints at his legacy. The Hiran Minaris, covered with stone projections in the form of elephant tusks. For a long time, it was thought to have been erected as a memorial to the Emperor Akbar's favorite elephant, but it was probably used as a milepost. The new city, with Akbar's imposing palace in the middle, became a haven of tolerance. He participated in festivities of other religions and abolished the taxes that non-Muslims had to pay, and he surrounded himself with theologians and priests from a range of different faiths: Muslims, Hindus, and Jesuits. He himself married a Rajput princess, a Hindu woman. For a long time, she was unable to conceive a child, and then the Sufi saint Salim Chishti foretold that she would bear the king their long-desired heir to the throne within the year, and she had 13 more children after that. The saint is still worshipped in a temple on the palace grounds of Fatehpur Sikri, mainly by women who hope to have children. Amidst all the antiquities that bear witness to India's history over the millennia, it's sometimes easy to forget that Indians live in a modern nation. Since 1947, India has been the largest democracy in the world, with a population of 1.4 billion. Nearly 20 million people live on the coast of the Arabian Sea in Mumbai, which used to be known as Bombay, after the Portuguese for Beautiful Bay. The Portuguese were also colonial rulers here for a time. But before the Portuguese arrived, the city was a scattered amalgamation of 7 islands. The natives of the area lived here as fishermen. They formed their own caste by the name of Koli. They helped develop the harbors and the coastlines around Mumbai. The name Mumbai stems from the Mumba Devi temple in Dongri, where the Kolis worshipped their gods. Can you make a good living out of fishing in these waters?
We have been facing problems. There are barriers or restrictions. No fish to catch. Fishing has not been that rewarding anymore.
It's not just the fishermen who suffer from the pollution. Today, the city is continuously growing. Everyone wants to come to Mumbai, the golden city, in search of a better life. The influence of the British colonial era is also still highly visible in Mumbai. After all, Queen Victoria was also Empress of India. In 1888, the Victoria Terminus was inaugurated to mark the Queen's Golden Jubilee. It's the most impressive example of Victorian Gothic architecture in India, and as part of the Victorian Gothic and Art Deco ensembles of Mumbai, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Half the subcontinent was part of British India back then, and the train station was considered its largest and most important building. With its beautiful stained glass windows, the enormous dome at the top, the extravagant stone vaults, this feels like a place of worship. This is railway station as cathedral. That's how British India celebrated itself in the 19th century. But those days are over, and the train station is no longer called Victoria Terminus. Today it is named after Indian national hero Chhatrapati Shivaji, a Hindu leader from the 17th century, a fitting patron because Shivaji was an early campaigner for Indian independence. Now the terminus is undergoing intense renovation. Pollution from the enormous traffic volumes and industrial pollution in the region have damaged the stone structure of the building. Another problem is the saline air from the sea. Craftsmen from all over India are working on the site, just as they did when the station was built. British architects worked with Indian craftsmen to include Indian architectural traditions, thus forging a new style unique to the city, which was then still called Bombay. In any case, the train station is still in operation today, and it's a key transport hub in India. More than 1,000 trains pass through here every day, heading in every direction across the subcontinent. 2 million passengers per day, vast numbers of whom are commuters from the suburbs. I'm taking the train to Kolkata, and from there I will explore Sundarbans National Park, a UNESCO World Natural Heritage Site. As I leave Mumbai, I can only think about how Victoria, who had originally lent her name to this palatial station, never experienced the wonder and beauty of this subcontinent firsthand, despite the fact that she was Empress of India. In the northeast of India, 7 rivers and hundreds of smaller streams form an extensive network of channels. This place, the Ganges Delta in the northeast of India, is home to mangrove forests that are by far the largest in the world. World heritage is about more than just culture. It's also about protecting the world's unique natural treasures. India's most important UNESCO World Natural Heritage Site, the Sundarbans National Park, is located at the point where India's mighty rivers, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, flow together. Mangroves even thrive in the salt water that mixes with the fresh water of the rivers here. Sundarbans, a Bengali name, means beautiful forest, and it's an ideal refuge for many endangered species of animals. This place is a perfect hunting ground for the spotted owlet. The lesser adjutant specializes in wetlands. There are more than 270 species of birds in the Sundarbans. The Sundarbans covers more than 10,000 square kilometers of territory, and during the floods it is flushed with seawater. It is home to enormous saltwater crocodiles, rare species of heron, and tiny mudskippers. The primeval ghost crab has its sanctuary here, as does the chital deer. This is where you'll find the world's largest mangrove forests, and it's also home to India's national animal, the Bengal tiger, an endangered species. Unfortunately, this majestic creature is still mercilessly hunted by poachers, despite the fact that killing these magnificent animals is considered a blasphemy in India. The tiger is the mount of the goddess Durga, who uses her weapons to defend humanity's divinity and to battle demons. But it would appear that the demons that drive humanity to devastate its natural environment are very difficult to defeat. No one knows exactly how many Bengal tigers still survive today. Estimates suggest that there may be fewer than 200 in the Sundarbans. The tigers drink the brackish water, which has very high salt content, and that reduces their life expectancy, so they're facing a double threat from humans and from nature. The Sundarbans region has been under growing threat from climate change. If the sea level continues to rise at such a rapid pace, it will throw off the delicate equilibrium of this unique biosystem. The Ganges, which flows into the Sundarbans, is one of the longest rivers in the world at 2,600 kilometers. It has its source in a western Himalayan glacier, crystal clear and high up in the mountains, and that's exactly where we're headed now, up the river to Shimla, the capital of the state of Himachal Pradesh. On the horizon are the Himalayan foothills with their 8,000-meter mountains. The area around Shimla used to be dotted with nothing but mountain cabins and nomads' tents. Today, the Queen of Hills, as Shimla is locally known, is inhabited by almost 200,000 people. In the 19th century, the British came, and the English viceroy had a palace built on a commanding hill in English Renaissance Revival style. Suddenly there was hustle and bustle. Half-timbered houses and a traditional Anglican church were erected in the Himalayas. Shimla became an exclusive mini-empire for the Brits, with afternoon teas, garden parties and cricket matches with English architecture and gardens to match. And because the wives of the civil servants and officers were often left to their own devices here for long periods of time, Shimla soon became known as the capital city of adultery. It's the strangest feeling to visit this handsome but rather provincial Victorian English confection in the midst of an Indian landscape. You get the feeling that the British colonial rulers of India wanted to be here and not to be here at the same time. The Indian national leader, Nehru, found an interesting way to put it when he said, the British ultimately failed as colonial rulers because they failed to become Indian. Instead, they left landmarks of their own culture. There is, for example, northern India's second oldest Anglican church, Shimla's Christ Church, overlooking the central square where, at the time, local farmers and craftsmen offered their goods for sale. In the Indian plain, it can get unbearably hot, at least for Europeans. In the summer of 1864, Viceroy of India and representative of Queen Victoria, John Lawrence, decided in one fell swoop that the seat of the British colonial government should be transferred in the hot months of every year to a city in the mountains. That was Shimla. All the important civil servants had to move here to the foothills of the Himalayas. The entire bureaucracy was relocated, lock, stock and barrel, to higher altitudes. An endless caravan of over 20,000 porters dragged the civil servants' possessions across the country in high summer and then back again when the summer was over. To put an end to this drudgery, construction on a train line from the city of Kalka to Shimla began in the late 19th century. Like India's other mountain railways, the Kalka-Shimla Railway is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. On its 100 kilometers of track, it climbs 1,500 meters skyward, which is why the trip takes nearly 6 hours. But the train offers spectacular views of the Himalayan foothills and wooded valleys. This stretch of railway only has one track, so the journey can't continue until the oncoming train has reached the station. The track gauge is just 762 millimeters, which is why it's also known as a toy train. The railways are as much a part of India as the Taj Mahal or the Ganges, and just like the rivers, they are a lifeline for this country, a piece of living history to be experienced firsthand. This railway is one of the finest legacies of the British colonial rulers in India. It's a masterpiece of British engineering. It was completed in 1903. The Kalka-Shimla Railway, with its 864 bridges and its more than 100 tunnels, is listed in the Guinness Book of Records as possessing the steepest incline in altitude worldwide. And I must say, this particular stretch is just a little bit hair-raising. Every day, on average, more than 8,000 trains travel 80,000 kilometers of track, carrying more than 23 million passengers. Cargo trains transport 3 million tons of goods and more. The total distance India's trains travel every day is 3 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Indian traditions are partly responsible for this. People are always traveling for religious festivals and family celebrations. After the trip on the Kalka-Shimla Railway, it's time for some relaxation. And an ancient Indian invention is just the ticket: yoga. The goal of yoga is to exercise control over your body and mind. Maybe yoga really does allow you to overcome physical limitations, to think without thoughts.
Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve shantu nirag bhave.
In the theory of yoga, a human being is a traveler moving through life in a horse-drawn cart. The body is the cart, the mind is the driver, and the 5 senses are the 5 horses pulling the cart. The soul is the passenger, and the harness controlling the whole thing is known in the Sanskrit language simply as yoga. Yoga is much more, of course, than a relaxation technique for stressed-out modern people. It's said that the first yogis were part of the advanced civilizations of the Indus River Valley over 5,000 years ago. We can see this on ancient depictions. For a long time, this kind of meditation, this self-improvement technique, only existed in India, where it was closely linked to Hinduism. Then, in the 19th century, yogi Swami Vivekananda set yoga on the path to its current world hegemony. He made a case for Hinduism as a world religion and heightened global awareness of India's cultural importance. We are visiting Yogi Rakesh Pandey, one of the most famous Indian masters. He practices yoga as a science.
Yogam sharanam gacchami. Om Shanti 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 Om.
Guruji, yoga is more than just a bodily discipline. Where does the thought behind yoga come from?
This came from the Vedas, in Indian Vedas. In the Vedas have the divided 4 parts: Rig Veda, Sham Veda, Atharva Veda and Yajur Veda. So in the Rig Veda, all my yogis, all my saints, rishis, munis says, you do the yoga. Old time, at that time, yoga is not this only the exercise. At that time, yoga is a philosophy, yoga is a lifestyle.
Many of the asanas, the position you showed us, looked like dance. And you sang before and after, you chanted musically before and after the positions. Is there a connection between yoga and music?
Yoga is like the music, the rhythm of the body, the melody of the mind, harmony of the soul, create a symphony of life. This is yoga.
I can think of no other country as enthralling and baffling as India. Nothing is straightforward. The riddles are never resolved. The sacred sites of Hinduism suggest a deep reverence for the natural environment, yet one also finds traces of a certain disregard for the upkeep of natural spaces and even for the bodies of water that many consider holy. Sewage from private households and industrial plants, rubbish deposited along thousands of kilometers of river, avalanches of garbage, and not just on the outskirts of the cities. Just over there, there's a temple. Down here on the street, the cows are doing their business. There's rubbish everywhere. In India, holiness and dirt are often found close together. And I think the reason for this lies partly in the Hindu concept of Maya, which means literally veil, but signifies the idea that the world that we can see and touch is not the thing that matters most, that the truly essential things lie in the domain of the invisible. India gives wings to our imagination. It fuels our dreams, but so much that matters is hidden from view. Its history has never moved in straight lines. It's not an easy place to understand, and that's exactly why I'll be back. No one who comes to India could fail to be astonished by the diversity and number of its cultures, aptly represented by its UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Sites. India is not a country, it's a country of countries, a civilization. Buddhism, a world religion, had its origins here, and Hinduism is present almost everywhere now, thanks to the global reach of the Indian diaspora. But unlike Europe, India has never sought to reshape the world in its own image. Instead, the world came to India, and everything that immigrants and conquerors brought to this subcontinent was absorbed and transformed by a society that was open but never servile. The thread of continuity with a deep past was never entirely broken, and the result is a nation unique in the richness of its contrasting colors and layers.